presented by the Center for Housing and Community Studies of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. We've got a great turnout today, made up of housing advocates, experts, practitioners, interested members of the public, and friends of the center. I'm Bruce Rich. I'm the director of the center. And here with me today are my colleagues, Maggie Hogan, Troy Moss, Kamal Sunjata, Tara Tillman. I'm sure others whom I cannot see on the screen right now, but thank you all for being here. This is one of a series of housing hangouts that our center has presented over the past, 10 years on topics of interest to our community represented here. We used to do them in person on the university campus. We migrated to the Zoom platform to keep going during the pandemic. And after that, we've decided to continue on the Zoom platform. It allows us to invite panelists and also audience members from around the country. And it's expanded our lens and our reach quite successfully. Today's topic, a critical look at the Section 8 program. We're going to take apart this essential program, try to see what makes it tick, and if possible, put it back together again. Taking the lion's share of the work on this today are the members of our distinguished panel of experts. We're honored to have with us today Jacob Carlson, Assistant Professor of Sociology at Kean University, Ingrid Gould-Ellen, Paulette Goddard, Professor of Urban Policy and Planning at the Wagner Graduate School of Public Service, and at the University of at New York University Furman Center. Will Fisher, Senior Director for Housing Policy and Research at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and Shelby King, Investigative Reporter for the invaluable Shelter Force magazine, the original voice of community development. I'm going to ask each panelist to say a word about their organization, about the work that they do, and how their work intersects with the interesting topic that we're taking up for discussion today. Jake, will you go first?
Sure. Thanks so much, Bruce, for having me on, and Tara and John and Troy and everyone at the center for putting on this really exciting event and series. So I'm Jake Carlson. Like I said, I'm at Kean University. My research is on largely gentrification, displacement, segregation, kind of the legacy of racial capitalism in housing. Among other things, I've been the co-author with Giampaolo Baiocchi at NYU, a proposal for a social housing development authority, proposed federal agency that would expand the supply of social housing through conversion and construction. Broadly been involved in kind of the social housing emerging world in the United States.
Ingrid.
Great. Well, thank you, Bruce, also for inviting me, and thanks to the center, and thanks to all of you for listening. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know I will learn a lot as well. I'm on the faculty at the Wagner School at NYU, which is our graduate school of public service, and I'm also one of the faculty directors at the Furman Center, which is a joint research center on housing and urban policy that spans the law school at NYU and the Wagner School. We also have a new local housing solutions lab at the Furman Center, and so we are working with city officials across the country to help them develop and implement and evaluate local housing strategies. I have Also just personally done, actually like Jake, I feel like I could have described my research exactly the same way as you. So it's on affordable housing, on segregation, gentrification. But I have also done a lot of work on the voucher program in particular, and in sort of 5 areas. One is that recently I've been looking at lease-up rates or success rates to show the share of voucher recipients who receive their vouchers who are able to or not able to actually lease up. We find that 2 in 5 voucher recipients actually have to return their vouchers. That's something because they're not able to successfully use them. And so I know we're going to talk about that today. I've also done a lot of work studying the neighborhoods reached by voucher holders. I've also done work thirdly on the impact of source of income discrimination laws, on the enactment of those laws, and also other voucher program reforms on voucher search outcomes. And fourth, I've done a bunch of work on the benefits that vouchers provide to the households that are able to successfully use them. And finally, I've been doing work more recently thinking about some kind of potential alternatives or tweaks to the voucher program that would make it sort of more flexible and actually potentially providing rental assistance directly to tenants and rather than to landlords.
Thank you. And Will.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks to everyone for joining today. So yeah, I'm Will Fitcher. I work at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and the Center is a nonprofit policy organization that works on a lot of different policy areas that affect people with low incomes, and I'm on the housing team at the Center, and we focus mostly on federal housing policy, though we have a new state policy initiative that we're really excited about. But on the federal level, we focus mostly on federal rental assistance programs that assist people with the lowest incomes, including public housing, but most of all on the voucher program. So I'm really excited about the conversation today.
Thank you, Will. And Shelby.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. I am an investigative reporter for Shelter Force magazine. I'm going to put the link to the magazine in the chat. We are a 45-ish year old online publication, used to be print, national publication. The purpose at the beginning was to connect tenant organizers and be a voice for tenant organization. We have expanded to affordable housing, community development. I write particularly often about affordable housing and have covered vouchers and the issues and the successes with vouchers pretty extensively, but I am really looking forward to learning from everyone also and hearing from you all. So thanks for having me.
Thank you all. So just a quick background on the topic, and I don't hold myself out as an expert on the Section 8 program, but I know enough about it to have I've identified and invited the people who really do know a lot about it. The program is the federal government's subsidy program for low-income renters, or at least the principal program. Simply stated, an income-eligible renter with a housing choice voucher no longer has to rent in a housing authority building, but any privately owned property, presuming that it conforms to the rules of the program. The government pays the rent beyond whatever is 30% of the renter household income up to the allowable fair market rent. A reaction against the concentration of poverty and crime that had marked many public housing projects, Section 8 promised low-income renters that they could live anywhere they wished and enjoy economic, educational, and social mobility. It didn't always work out that way. It's been underfunded. The waiting lists are infamous. Even the lucky ones who got a voucher often couldn't find a landlord to accept it, as was already noted. When it works well, it's amazing. but it's not working well enough. And some wonder if we can ever rely on the private housing market to solve our affordable housing challenges. Our distinguished panel will discuss Section 8, its history, its strong points, its failings, and what, if anything, we should do to make it better. So we'll begin the panel discussion now. The format will be that I will put a series of questions to the panel. I might direct the question to an individual panelist or to the panel as a whole. If it's to the panel as a whole, anyone jump in. We'll leave time at the end for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question during the discussion time, feel free to drop the question into the chat, and Troy will collect the questions and we'll address them in the order received, and we'll try to leave some time for additional questions from the floor. So, first topic, landlord acceptance, the willingness of property owners to participate in the Section 8 program, is perennially one of the biggest issues we face. Landlords have met the program with ambivalence. On the one hand, it kind of guarantees the payment of rent, so any owner ought to like it. On the other hand, there's a price to pay. Landlords often say that the rules are onerous. So my question, are they onerous? Anyone jump in? Anyone of the panel jump in?
I mean, I'll start off. I mean, I think that there are a number of rules that go along with vouchers that, you know, I think some of them are or most of them are designed to protect participants or protect public funds in one way or another. You know, I think some of them are needed, but I do think there's a lot of room to streamline or improve rules so that they, you know, still provide the basic protections that we need, but make it something that's more useful or more user friendly for landlords and also for the folks participating in the program. I mean, I totally agree that it's a really important goal to make it a program that more landlords accept, so that people in the program are able to use their vouchers and have a wider choice about where they can use them.
Yeah, and I would jump in to also say that you know, I think that landlords do, you know, have a point that the rules can sometimes be administratively burdensome, particularly inspections, which you know, maybe we should talk about you know, also in later in the conversation. But and you know, and qualitative evidence on sort of qualitative research that has studied why landlords are wary of participating in the voucher program often point to, you know, it sort of suggests that it comes from a combination of these sort of, I think, legitimate concerns about some of the sort of bureaucratic and administrative headaches of dealing with local housing authorities, and also then, you know, also some stereotypes about what about voucher holders as tenants, and some PHAs seem to be more challenging to work with than others, but you know, I completely agree with Will that I think the, you know, local housing authorities and HUD should do everything possible to make the voucher program easier to use for both tenants and for landlords. And you know, some landlords may still be wary of housing voucher holders, but let's at least make the program work better for the landlords who are open to participating in the program. I also think we sort of could there's also a role, I think, for sharing information about the benefits of the voucher program and busting myths about the voucher program and about voucher tenants. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about the program. So I think, you know, some of these sort of, you know, administrative hurdles and challenges to working with the program are legitimate, some of them I think are often exaggerated. And so I think again, pushing to sort of lower those burdens to the extent to making sure that you're still sort of, you know, providing the appropriate safeguards for for tenants, but at the same time getting the true information out there and really investing in educating landlords and about what it really means to participate in the voucher program.
Let me just mention or offer thanks to the audience members who are putting their greetings and information in the chat. We love to know who's attending. We recognize many familiar faces and some new ones today. Let's talk about inspections. That's one of the onerous requirements that sometimes gets called out by landlords for special scorn. We know that not only in the Section 8 context, landlords sometimes just don't like mandatory inspections. We're doing some work here at the center on proactive housing code enforcement, and the same issue comes up. And some of them say that a lot of these bad conditions are the fault of irresponsible or destructive tenants. So all that said, do we need to reduce or streamline the inspection requirements of Section 8, or is that part of the sort of backbone of the program, or both?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I mean, I think like others have said, there are some things that can be streamlined. One of the big challenges with inspections is the delays and the wait time. So inadequate staffing for public housing authorities leave landlords kind of sitting there waiting in kind of an unpredictable state. That said, I do think inspections are really important. Most of the inspections, are not doing sort of kind of crazy requirements. There is a bit of discretion on behalf of the inspectors that can be a little frustrating. But by and large, if you're sort of keeping up with standard maintenance, you're going to be in okay shape. And I think those are important qualities. I mean, I think probably later in the conversation, we'll talk about some of the new proposals for a different structure of the housing voucher program, where tenants are given directly the money, and then they're effectively sort of cash renters in the same way that everybody else is. So that would suggest that there's no inspection requirement. And I think there's a lot of pros and challenges with that that I would love to talk more about. But I do think we have to think about how we're using our public dollars and whether we would feel good about, giving, say, $24 billion in a subsidy program to property owners who are not maintaining housing at an adequate level. Is that a good use of our public dollars, especially for renters who are in very, very vulnerable states? So I think there's some streamlining, but doing away with inspections, I think, would be a very bad thing.
From a tenant's perspective, I think a problem with some of the inspections is that if a landlord is participating in the Section 8 program and an inspection happens and the landlord fails the inspection and then doesn't do anything about it, then the agency can stop paying for the apartment, which then causes the tenant to be evicted. So I think that if the consequences either fell on the landlord, I don't know how that would work, or if, not that I am a huge fan of handing money to landlords, but if the money went to fix the problem and keep the person housed, then the result of the inspection, I think, would be better.
But
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that I think inspections is one of the places where there could be reforms to the existing voucher program that would really do the most to make more landlords able to participate in the program. I think part of it is like better administration at some PHAs to do inspections more quickly. But I think also there's a lot of situations where we don't need to be requiring front-end inspections, where it's enough to trust the judgment of a family that they think the unit's of adequate quality for them to move in. I think could retain inspections in higher risk situations, but like cases where it's a unit that was just recently built, or it's a unit that was inspected under loan capacity tax credit or another federal program, units that were just inspected for another voucher holder, or units in neighborhoods where housing quality problems are rare. I think those are all situations where I think the benefits of getting rid of the initial inspection requirement outweigh the costs. And that would require federal legislation, but I think that's one thing that should be a priority for Congress to look at.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going to jump in and say the same thing, Will, but also let me just add that also, I think we need some more sort of experimentation and some more evaluation of some of these kinds of reforms. So, we just had this, and I don't know whether actually anyone else on the panel knows, but if there has been research about this that I don't know, but a lot of housing authorities, just moved to virtual inspections in a lot of cases, right, during the pandemic. Like, how did that work out? I mean, that could be a lot cheaper and a lot quicker. Why not allow, I'm sort of to Will's point, sort of let households kind of self-certify, and let's, upfront, and we could rely again on, municipal inspections, or, relax requirements again, where a unit has been recently inspected. But I think that, I think we need to sort of encourage some experimentation and study some of these alternatives to their traditional methods of conducting inspections, to see if we can improve efficiency and really get more landlords, right, to participate in the program as a result, without putting tenants at risk, at the kinds of risks that Jake and Shelby were talking about.
Let me throw one more of those items into the mix that are sometimes cited as reasons why landlords don't want to participate, and that is the adequacy of the fair market rent system. So with rents skyrocketing in many markets, HUD's fair market rent limits don't always keep pace with market trends. I think HUD has experimented with some more current indices, like the ones Zillow and other commercial firms put out. We at the center use those to track rents because the census data doesn't pick up the very recent and very significant, very often increases. So will this kind of boosting of allowable rents be a key factor in our efforts to improve landlord acceptance? Anyone?
Yeah, I think that those changes, so HUD made changes to fair market rents to make them track more closely with recent data, like you were saying, last year in 2023, and they're going to do that again for the coming year, for the next year. And I think it already has made a difference. I think we've seen more vouchers getting put to use since those changes were made. I think the thing is that a lot of it was, just catching up. I think fair market rents fell behind a lot during the surge in market rents that happened late in the pandemic, and that these things are just letting them catch up. So I think they're moving towards getting vouchers on a level playing field with the rents that are being paid in the market. But in some places, even the changes they've made so far aren't enough.
Yeah, and if I can just add that I think that there are two issues here, right? One is sort of across the board, how well the fair market rents measure sort of what the market rent is for really available units in that, the units that come on the market. But the other issue is that, the way that fair market rents are generally set, right, is at a metropolitan area level, which means that high rent neighborhoods, there are very few units that are sort of affordable to voucher voucher holders in high rent neighborhoods and a lot more in low rent neighborhoods. So the voucher affordable units tend to be concentrated in low rent neighborhoods. And so the other thing that HUD has done recently is sort of tilt that subsidy scale so that they in moving to small area fair market rents, basically calculating the FMR, the fair market rents or the payment standards at a zip code level rather than at a metropolitan area level, which kind of tilts the subsidy, but it's a cost neutral way to basically, to increase the rents in the rent subsidies in high rent neighborhoods and make those make the voucher program more attractive to landlords in high rent neighborhoods, and to lower the subsidies in lower rent neighborhoods where the market rents are lower. And I think we have very good evidence and growing evidence now that moving to these small area fair market rents, has helped voucher holders move to higher rent, lower poverty neighborhoods. It sort of opened up a broader set of neighborhoods and a broader set of choices for voucher holders without actually increasing the cost of the voucher program. So this is sort of the evidence is that moving to these sort of neighborhood specific fair market rents subsidies has encouraged a more geographically diverse set of landlords to participate in the program, and therefore sort of helped families reach a broader set of neighborhoods. I think the evidence on just kind of increasing subsidies increasing the rent ceilings across the board is actually a lot more mixed, because landlords sometimes can, the evidence suggests landlords may sort of pocket those higher subsidies without participating more.
Ingrid, my next question is directed to you initially, though anyone else on the panel feel free to follow up. It's about source of income discrimination. It's the term we use, if I understand it correctly, to describe a landlord's refusal to rent to someone because part of the rent is paid through a federal subsidy. Maybe someone thinks low-income people are unreliable or shouldn't be in that particular neighborhood. But landlords also have legitimate reasons or superficially legitimate reasons not to rent to someone. Minimum income, credit score requirements, fees, rents just beyond the allowable standards, and so on. So they can refuse to accept vouchers without refusing to accept vouchers. So how can we know whether behind these facially good reasons may be bad or discriminatory reasons?
So it's a good question. I'm going to back up for a second. I'm going to answer this in two parts. Because I do want to just emphasize that there are a lot of landlords who explicitly refuse to house voucher holders, right? I mean, they don't hide their reasons in other criteria. And, the really excellent, compelling Urban Institute report from a few years ago that Mary Cunningham, Martha Galvez, and others did. And they basically, sort of ran an experiment where they were, advertising. They were sending emails to landlords and saying that they had a housing choice voucher and could they rent the unit. And they found that 78% of landlords in Fort Worth and I think 76% of landlords in Los Angeles just outright refused. Just we don't house voucher. We won't take Section 8. And so, and I think there's good evidence that source of income, the enactment of source of income discrimination laws, work to encourage a broader set of landlords to accept vouchers. It's sort of like this stick can make a difference. Now there are enforcement problems, and it's not the only answer. But I do think that, and there are other ways that landlords might evade. But I think that I just want to sort of state that up front, that these laws really in themselves can be very valuable, right? That's kind of, but, secondly, you're saying that there are certainly many landlords that, and this is really true whether they're housing, considering housing choice voucher holders or other low income tenants, they rely on a variety of screening criteria that can screen out a lot of really good, responsible, but lower income tenants, and may particularly disadvantage renters of color. And so I think, we don't, for instance, often there are a lot of landlords in lower neighborhoods who have really high credit score requirements. Well, we don't really have any evidence that those really high credit scores predict rent paying. And so I think that, from a research standpoint, I think researchers should be studying the impact of these requirements on renter behavior. Policymakers should really be pushing landlords to sort of, to loosen those, to scrutinize their practices, and regulate kind of the more stringent and unreasonable requirements. I also think the policymakers should really be pushing for more transparency. There's also just a lot of murkiness about what criteria landlords are using. And so I think landlords should be required to really put out there, what are the criteria they're using? What are the fees that they're charging? And, so I think that that's really important as well.
Yeah, if I can sort of add on this issue of this really important issue of kind of the screening process. The ways that landlords do this are based on records that are quite durable sometimes. So Wisconsin has a really egregious example where if you had an eviction filed against you, even if there wasn't any sort of monetary judgment, it stays on your record for 20 years. And so if you are, one time something bad happened, for 20 years, you are now sort of relegated to a totally different rental market. Revel Sims at Wisconsin has done some really interesting work on this, about how people who have one eviction record are basically bounced around through a set of effectively slumlords because nobody else will rent to them just from this one mark on their record. And so we have these very simplified understandings of who's a quote unquote good renter, that all of a sudden create this dual housing market of really, really precarious and bad situations. And so these screening criteria are hugely important, which are, when landlords have a lot of, they've got a lot of people lined up out at their door because of inadequate supply, then they can sort of use these criteria a little bit more stringently.
Let me ask a follow-up to that. A form of source of income protection is catching on in North Carolina, with local ordinances in quite a few cities applicable, but limited, applicable only to housing developments which accept local financing or subsidies. So limited and perhaps less likely to attract state legislative preemption. The North Carolina legislature has been an active preemptor in the housing arena, having already intervened to stop inclusionary zoning, proactive code enforcement, and rent control. But as far as I know, only Arizona, Indiana, and Texas have preempted source of income protection laws. But is it only a matter of time? Is this going to be the next preemption big thing? I wondered if any of the panelists had caught wind of this issue, which particularly interests us here at the center.
I think, there are a lot of tenant groups pushing for a tenant bill of rights, whether those be statewide. Some states have passed them, some municipalities are passing them. Of course, there's a federal tenant bill of rights that is proposed by Tenants Together, I believe. I think, to kind of piggyback on the previous question about how can you tell, though, if landlords are usurping those protections, I don't think there's any way to tell. And I think that any new protections, there are ways around them. For example, something nobody has mentioned is 3 times landlords requiring 3 times the amount of rent for someone to get in. I mean, I remember when I was a renter, it never even occurred to me that is an unfair requirement, and why would they require 3 times the amount of rent? And so I think that there are so many kind of secondhand ways to keep voucher holders or just lower income folks out, that really getting these policies changed in laws like we're talking about with source of income protections is really important on many levels.
Shelby, a question to you. You've written about, actually more than a couple of you have written about the efforts, particularly in the first Congress under the Biden administration, to expand and to universalize the Section 8 program. I think that was the most recent initiative put forth by Maxine Waters and others in the Build Back Better battles of 2021 to turn Section 8 into an entitlement. It's very ambitious and would be very costly. So my question, Shelby, and to the group is, if you had $100 extra billion to spend on housing every year, is this how you would do it?
That is such a big question. If I had $100 billion extra dollars to spend on housing each year, I would not. I think that the recent HUD experiment to give tenants direct payments, I think I would lean more toward directly subsidizing rent rather than directly subsidizing landlords. So I think that if I had all that money, I'd go for social housing, but that's a different webinar.
We had that in our housing hangout a couple of years ago. Well, that was a great session, and we might have a question later on in this discussion about that. Well, let's get to that. Jake, let me put it to you. A social housing question. Some say Section 8 is just another market solution. And market solutions are a contradiction in terms. The numbers don't add up. And given a choice, the market is going to it has to put profits ahead of people's basic needs. So is it time to take housing back from the market and revive the old idea of public ownership of housing?
Short answer, yes, I would think so. To the question of what I would do with $100 billion or plus. I mean, so, in countries that do have robust social housing systems, which we'll define in a second, they also do have housing allowance systems. So a voucher-like or tenant subsidy program also exists in conjunction with something that is more on the, supply side of housing. And I think this is something that we've, disinvested from as a country, obviously, for many years. Even from the very beginning, public housing was very quickly kind of set on a path to have insufficient funding in a way that other countries didn't. And so I think the thing with a sort of demand subsidy, like an allowance or a voucher program, is that money, walks out the door of the public budget and it never comes back. It stays out. These are not investments in sort of recreating a market and trying to shift how a housing market works. I mean, obviously there are shifts to it, but this money sort of goes out the door, which is different than how a lot of other countries see it as, creating key targeted investments in new kinds of housing that have broader market impacts on both the direct housing that they're creating, as well as the broader private market. Some of these are direct ownership programs, sort of akin to our public housing system. When they're publicly owned, they tend to have a much broader income spectrum. than the kind of housing we have for public housing. So you have a bit of a cross subsidy going on. So the cost of it is also reduced. You also have kind of greater integration and a lot of other social benefits. But also not all of these are publicly owned. A lot of the social housing programs include, the one that everyone looks at in Vienna has private market but limited profit companies that create housing that are not owned by the municipality. There's also a big sort of avenue for cooperatives, community land trusts. When I use the word social housing, I kind of think of it as this umbrella term of housing where your ability to live in it, and how much you pay is not solely determined by the market. I think we can get into this misnomer of taking housing out of the market to imagine like there is no market, but even in all social housing programs, there is some kind of market mechanisms. It's just a question of if those market mechanisms are kind of put under the thumb of some kind of public or social power. And when we do that, we get these sort of broader knock-on effects that I think are quite powerful. And so I think that's a conversation that is budding in communities all over the country. There's sort of every month we get a new call about some new social housing campaign in a municipality because people are trying to grapple with the solutions we had are not working. So can we think differently and look outside of our country for other kinds of solutions and look within our country? We have a long history of limited equity cooperatives and community land trusts that give us a lot to learn from.
I would jump in, but I want to hear from Will. And
so I think I agree with Jacob's short answer. I think we should have more publicly and socially owned housing in this country. I think there's advantages to having part of the rental market have that kind of ownership. But I also think, and I agree with what he was saying, that this isn't contradictory with having housing allowances or vouchers. I think if I had the $100 billion, that would be the first thing that I would put it towards. And the reason for that is that I think that's the most effective way to make housing affordable to people with the lowest income. So like in a lot of affordable housing development programs, or in a lot of, at least that I've seen, of the social housing development programs, that they reduce rents, well below market levels, but are often still above what a minimum wage worker or a senior with on supplemental security income, or a person with disabilities, or the lowest income renters often aren't able to afford that much, and that's because the rents that they can afford usually aren't enough even to cover the cost of operating housing. So in order to make housing affordable to folks like that, you really need an ongoing operating subsidy or rental assistance. And I think it makes sense for that assistance to be choice-based in the way that vouchers are, so that people could choose to use it in social housing and also in other housing, so that they're able to take it when their circumstances of their lives change. They can move from one unit to another. So to me, I think like the right answer is to be doing multiple things, and I think also reducing barriers to development of private market housing is also important, just increase the quantity of housing. But that all of these things, I think, are compatible and are part of what would create a system where everyone in this country is able to afford housing and has a choice about where they live.
Yeah, I agree with that also. I mean, I'm also a fan of sort of of place-based subsidized housing, permanently subsidized housing, but I think we often forget that it takes a lot of resources, right? It's not only the resources to build, but resources to continue to maintain that housing, to operate that housing, to reinvest in that housing when, as it ages and needs capital repairs. And, so I think we need to be realistic that about the long run costs, and make sure that we have sort of an asset management plan that's going to work. I also think, while I agree, if I had my 100 billion, I would be spending it on a mix of sort of I would go to vouchers first for extremely low income households, say, but I think there is a role for place-based housing, and in a lot of places. I do think that just sort of want to introduce a little bit of sort of political expediency to here. And, the politics of expanding public housing, social housing at a national level are really challenging in this country. I mean, as people have said so far, I mean, Congress has, never liked public housing in this country, has sort of continually underfunded it, and to a much greater degree than they've funded Section 8 much more generously than has been much more supportive than public housing. And I just don't know that I see that changing anytime soon. And I think that, in other countries, as Jake mentioned, you sort of, social housing serves a broader, distribution of people with a broader distribution of incomes. And so it has sort of a broader natural constituency. But I think, to the extent that I don't know that we would go there in this country. And that being said, I think there are ways that we can sort of get a lot of the benefit and the security and sort of the long run affordability of public ownership with sort of somewhat modified approaches. Like, what really matters is that the public controls the land, right? Or they're sort of, so I thinking about publicly owned land, community land trusts, government subsidized private nonprofit developments, inclusionary zoning with that mandate sort of permanently affordable units, and there the owners sort of have a built-in incentive to continue to maintain the buildings because they have market rate tenants too. It also ensures some level of integration and access to sort of neighborhood resources for tenants. And I'd say the other thing is sort of, while I'm on my 100 billion, the other thing that I would leave room for would be I think there's also a role for sort of short-term emergency rental assistance. I think we've just seen how effective that can be, and that might be for people who are earning slightly more than kind of the incomes that are targeted for vouchers, and people may not need sort of permanent subsidies, but there's also a lot of low and moderate income households face a lot of income and struggle with a lot of income and financial volatility. And so having some kind of emergency financial assistance at a federal level, a standing program, I think is also really critical.
I will second that. We do eviction diversion work here at the center, and it's kind of amazing now that we've seen a little bit of a before and after the expiration of the emergency rental assistance program, how powerful a modest amount of rental assistance can be in literally preventing evictions and all of the very bad consequences that flow from an eviction. Yeah.
Can I add here, when talking about ways to make Section 8 vouchers work for landlords in the current situation, and in bringing up social housing, in a lot of the places that social housing does work, it's partly because social housing isn't just a warehouse for all low income folks. It's a mix, and Ingrid, you just mentioned this, mix of incomes. And so the higher income folks cross subsidize the landlords by paying more for units so that the lower income folks can live there. So, I mean, if we were to think about distributing voucher money, then if we were wanting to make landlords whole, then allowing lower income folks in with higher income folks, raising rents for the higher income folks to equal it all out might be one way to get landlords to be less resistant to having lower income folks in their buildings.
I want to try to get two more topics in before we go to the questions and comments. Here's a question about mobility. It's looking at some of the same issues we've talked about, but from a different angle. Life courses are determined by zip codes, we often say. Research demonstrates that when voucher holders succeed in moving to lower poverty areas, they often have better opportunities. But I often think that high poverty communities are also communities, and many would prefer to remain. And in the discourse of dispossession and gentrification, we often are reminded that many people would like to remain. So rather than scattering people across the city, should we also be investing in neglected neighborhoods and improve the housing and other opportunities in the places where people already live? And is this approach at odds with the philosophy of Section 8?
Well, I mean, to me, it's not at all at odds. I mean, I think the idea of the voucher program is to give people a choice about where they live, and that should certainly mean giving them access to to low poverty areas. And I think the program does some of that now. It could be doing a much better job than it does. But it also means giving them the choice to live in higher poverty areas if that's what they prefer. And today, I think the voucher program does a lot of good in higher poverty areas where there are people who have more stable housing because they have a voucher to help them afford the rent. So I think that choice is critical to it. And I think that all fits with also having investments in schools and parks and services and whatever else it takes in order to make higher poverty neighborhoods better places to live.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think it's at all. I mean, the program is called the Housing Choice Voucher Program, right? It's all, and we should be thinking about enhancing choices and investing in historically disadvantaged communities is part of that. Now, that being said, also, I mean, I don't want to be, I think be realistic that it takes time, right, to improve. It's, you can't kind of improve schools overnight, and so I think, the voucher program, again, I think we should be doing both, but we should be giving people the choice of a legitimate choice and good choices of where they can live.
So is geographic mobility a goal in and of itself, or is mobility something that a family should have the choice to avail themselves of? I guess is what I'm asking.
I think mobility kind of implicitly has been one of the goals. This was part of the rationale for the moving to opportunity study, the idea that, getting people out of the neighborhoods they were in. That said, I don't know if, there's these dilemmas, right? Between people having ties and connections to their own community versus wanting to go somewhere else. So I think the framing of choice is a little bit, personally, I find that a little more comfortable. If people want to stay where they are, great. But if they want to move, they can do that too. I think the question on investment in the communities where people are is a really, really important one. We kind of need we are always looking for silver bullets, whether it's solving the problems of education, of housing, of the environment. So all these things are kind of connected. But improving neighborhoods where people already live is a hugely important thing. There's also the dilemma of that when improvements come, then rents get more expensive and people can no longer afford to live there. There's sort of this, I sort of like to say, we have this dilemma of like, why can't the poor have nice things? Because once things get better, then rents go up. So a combination of some place-based subsidies, some vouchers can probably help people exercise that choice, so it's not the same kind of trade-off that it is in a lot of ways today.
I also want to point out that the idea of mobility is really great as long as that mobility is voluntary and can be actually completed. If you've got a housing choice voucher, but then your choice becomes unaffordable where you're at, and the only choice is to move 15 miles from your job, but you don't have a car and there's no transportation, then like the choice is between crappy and crappier, which isn't much of a choice.
Well, let me address a question to you. You've written about, as and others on the panel have written about, the success of the Section 8 program. I feel like we've been bashing it a little bit, and I want to put it out there, the question whether the shortcomings of the Section 8 program obscure the fact that for, I think it's 2.2 million voucher households, it's been a spectacular success, increasing not only geographic but economic mobility and sharply reducing housing instability and homelessness. Is that something we want to make sure we underscore in this discussion today, Will?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, yeah, we've been talking a fair amount about things that the voucher program could do better, but I think it really is important to emphasize that it does a tremendous amount of good right now for millions of people around the country. And that's comes through in the research where there have been, rigorous controlled studies that have shown just enormous effects on homelessness and housing instability and overcrowding, and that those things have, because stability is so important to people's lives, they mean that, kids bounce from school to school less, they're less likely to be placed in foster care. There's effects on social and behavioral outcomes for kids. So this is a program that does a tremendous amount of good for the people it helps. And I think it's also, I think if you talk to voucher holders, they will often express frustrations with the program, but they'll also tell you that it does, make a big difference to be able to afford housing and to be able to afford it without spending the lion's share of their money on it. So yeah, I think it does a lot of good. And I think it's also important to emphasize that this is a program that, that, well, on the one hand, there are lots of voucher holders who aren't able to use their vouchers, and there are landlords that don't accept vouchers. And those are problems that, like we've been talking about, are really, really important to address. But it's also true that PHAs use essentially every dollar of the money that they get from the program, all on average across the country and over the long run. And so it's the main constraint on helping more people in this program is having more resources to do it. So I think that's also a really important thing to recognize. Yes, I think we should be, at the same time, both expanding this program that really is very successful in a lot of ways, and also looking for ways to improve it to make it work even better.
Yeah. And Bruce, I just want to jump in and say, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I was sitting here itching, thinking like all we're doing is criticizing the voucher program. And I really don't want to lose sight of the fact that it just does a tremendous amount, provides a tremendous amount of benefit to the families that are able to receive and use their vouchers. And I mean, again, part of this is evidenced again by the long waiting list for vouchers. Now that again, it's also shows that we don't have enough supply. But I think that, and I want to underscore, just add two things to what Will said. Is one is that, I think that the program we have particularly strong evidence that the program really benefits children, right? When their families get vouchers, that we've done work showing that it improves their performance in school. There's, the MTO research shows that just receiving a conventional voucher actually improves kids' chances of graduating from college and earning more, being more successful on the labor market as young adults. And finally, I think we also have, again, we've been talking a lot about these issues with the voucher program, but I think we also have growing sort of concrete evidence of just sort of minor, relatively modest tweaks to the voucher program really make a difference in improving outcomes and search outcomes. So I don't think this is a case where we don't just have to say, we don't know how to improve the program. I think, in addition to funding it more generously, I think there are ways that we can we can tweak it and continue to experiment and find, even other ways additional ways to tweak it to really make it live up to its promise of providing housing choice and stability to a large number of low-income households.
And yet the funding question keeps coming up when we talk to people in communities about housing precarity and available subsidies. The subject of waiting lists comes up, of course, all the time. It's at the same time an actual thing, but it's also a sort of public perception. When people think about Section 8, they think of waiting lists or municipalities where they don't even bother keeping a waiting list anymore. So is funding gonna, and when I threw $100 billion annually out there earlier, I was thinking, I think that was a number I heard for sort of universality of or entitlement of Section 8, but I think the last version of that Build Back Better bill, the one that only failed by one vote in the Senate, if I recall, had $80 billion for expansion of Section 8. Is that, and so maybe that is politically feasible somehow, maybe not in this Congress, but in a soon Congress, do you think?
I don't know that I don't know that I can speak to whether or not it's politically feasible, but I would agree with Will and Ingrid and say that if it was an entitlement and everybody who needed a voucher could go and get one, then I think that I also don't want to sound like I think that it's just a negative program. I think that were it funded correctly, it would do wonders. But the fact that you see cattle calls where people stand in line for 12 hours and then stampede to the housing voucher office to get on a waiting list or get a voucher after being on a waiting list for years is it really screams to how much funding we need. So I hope that it was very disappointing that it got axed from Build Back Better altogether. I was really hopeful that we'd see some funding for housing.
And I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about the effect on the supply. I've heard it said that expanding the voucher program would itself tend to promote more affordable housing with a bigger pool of voucher holders, creating market incentives to build more units for them and their guaranteed rent payments to move into. Is that a plausible scenario?
May I just say something on the previous question
Sure.
about the political feasibility? I mean, I think it is a lot of money. It would require a really big expansion, but I think all of the low-income entitlements we have, things like SNAP or Medicaid, we didn't have them until we had them. And I think that there's a lot of support for addressing housing needs in this country. I think there's a lot of recognition that housing should be a right for everybody. And so I think it's something that is feasible, is possible. It's going to take time and a lot of work, but I don't think it's something that people should write off as something that can't be done. And then on your question about the impact on markets, I think it's important that moving towards universal rental assistance be accompanied by things to increase the supply of housing, including investments in social and affordable housing, and also reducing barriers to development so that those vouchers are being used in a market where there's more supply. But I think it's also can be overstated how much of a barrier that is. I think most of the people who need this assistance are already renting housing. That this would just help them afford the housing that they're currently renting. When we talk about all the people who are paying over half their income for rent, that doesn't require new units. It just requires help for them to afford that housing. And I think the other thing I'd say is that there's a lot of the reforms that we're talking about are things that would help vouchers be used in a wider range of units. And those are also all things that would help rental markets to absorb a big expansion.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I'm not a political expert, but it does seem to me that the politics around housing have shifted over the last 5 or 10 years. I think that there's a lot more. I think as sort of affordability pressures have climbed up the income ladder and squeezed, household budgets of sort of now not just low income households, moderate income households, middle income households. I think I think we could see more support. I mean, I think just, the emergency rental assistance program, just to take one example, right? There was what 46 billion, right? I think provided for ERAP. You compare that to the emergency rental assistance that was provided after the housing crash in 2008, that was 1.5 billion. And that was a battle to get that 1.5 billion. So, maybe there's reason for optimism there. I do think that in terms of market effects, I think adding more vouchers could potentially spur over the longer run, right? It can't happen immediately. Housing can't be created immediately, but over the longer run, it could spur expansion to supply. But I think that, it should, let me say, sort of, a real expansion to the voucher program should come with the kinds of, source of income discrimination laws, right? Maybe adding to the Fair Housing Act, like sort of a protected class for people using vouchers and other kinds of programmatic reforms, as well as regulatory barriers to ensure that housing can be built and housing can be built in a variety of different communities.
We've covered a lot of topics. I want to turn to our audience at this point. We have 81 comments in the chat, but actually very few of them are questions, but we do have a few, and I'll ask Troy to read those one at a time. And then after that, if we have some time, I'll ask if there may be any questions that weren't in the chat, but may still come from the floor. So Troy?
Yeah, so one of the first things that we saw here, this is not necessarily a question, but if Darius is still in here, he wanted to give a little bit of his experience with some of the Section 8 participants that he has.
Hi there, all. Thanks for letting me speak here. I'm just curious how many folks of all these folks on here have any experience with renting to Section 8 tenants. I'm in California, Santa Cruz County, where we were listed as the most expensive rental market in the country, and that's based on median rent to median income. We tend to always appear within the top 3. I have 83 rental units spread across 3 counties, and half of those are Section 8 tenants. I've been doing it for 30 years, so I have lots of experience with the program. Obviously, I like it. I've had very good luck with my Section 8 tenants. There's a lot of stereotypes that are frankly just wrong, but there are issues. One of my biggest problems with the program is it doesn't have a work requirement, and I have too many tenants. And anybody under 50 in my book is young that really are capable of working, but they've chosen Section 8 as an early retirement program. And there's, like anywhere else in this country, you can't spit without hitting a help wanted sign. And our town desperately needs folks to take these. We have low wage jobs. We're a service economy. We're a beach town. There's lots of folks that are very rent burdened, over 50%. The joke is that they get paid in sunshine dollars. Well, sunshine dollars don't pay for food, gas, and rent. And frankly, they should be given priority on the waiting lists. And, this might sound politically incorrect, but a lot of folks on disability that I have many of them, and I like them dearly, love them dearly. but they are taking up a rental unit that could be occupied by a low income working poor tenant with a voucher. Unless your doctor can give you a note saying I have to live within 1 mile of the Pacific Ocean as part of my disability, frankly, these folks may want to look at cheaper locales where they don't have a critical housing shortage like we have here. But again, my biggest frustration with the program is the lack of a work requirement, or at a minimum, prioritizing folks on the waiting lists that have full-time jobs that pay 15 to 18 bucks an hour. A survey was done recently, and in my area, you need to afford the average rental. You have to have your job has to pay $60.14 an hour. That's how bad it is here. And I have way too many folks, again, on early retirement, as I like to call it, some paying as little as $0 for a nice one bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the ocean, 3 blocks on the wharf. I think from a social justice point of view, that's just flat wrong. Anyway, I got a lot more to say if you're curious about my 30 years of experience.
Derek, we greatly appreciate your perspective. I'm not a landlord, so I don't have that perspective, but I talk to landlords all the time, and it's very important to hear their experience. Roy, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, so
Can I ask- could I say one thing really fast to respond to Darius? Is that okay?
Oh yeah.
I just I wanted to vouch for the housing first model and just say from an expense standpoint, and even in your own community, Darius, I think that there is a lot of evidence that supports the idea that making sure that folks have a home and a stable place, whether they're looking for work or not. It's cheaper often for the town than to allow people to remain on the streets and to take up social services that way. So I understand your frustration, and I really appreciate you sharing, but I think that we might be missing some benefits of allowing these people to be housed regardless of whether they're looking for work or not.
Let me just weigh in. I have seen lives transformed. I've taken a number of folks off the street. They have there's lots of programs to get folks into housing, and it's the housing first model, of course, is what drives the narrative here. But then I've seen one problem is with folks that are currently homeless, living on the street, is the apartment becomes what I call the Coral Street Annex. I say that because Coral Street is the street that our homeless shelter is on. And then all of their buddies that, helped them on the streets, gave them cigarettes, money, whatever, they all end up showing up, taking showers. They bring their problems, they bring their pets, they bring their arguments, they bring their drugs. And frankly, I've done that not once, but 5 times. Of those 5 folks, I've had to evict 4. Based on what the neighbors say, they're going to just, they're ready to tar and feather me, given the behavior. So, yeah. But then on the other hand, I have seen folks when you give them the gift of housing, and it totally transforms their life, and they're able to then seek employment, get their children back, maybe from past, bad decisions and transgressions. But unfortunately, in my experience, the numbers aren't that great in terms of success rates. Thanks.
Can I say something?
Please.
I hear your frustrations, Darius, and maybe this is the social worker in me. There are going to always be people who take advantage of certain things, programs, and I think you're taking on an emotion and a feeling that you're not going to be able to control that. It is unfortunate that there are people out here who definitely deserve more. The reason I'm on this webinar right now is because as a school social worker, I have a family right now who is living in her car. She has a job, but it's not enough. And she's in the helping profession as well, but it's still not enough for her to afford housing. However, she makes too much money to get any other assistance. So like that's a struggle for her as well. And then there are other people who I know, like you said, receiving these benefits, but yet they're driving around 2020 Acura or something. But I would just say, because I hear your frustration, and as a helping person, I think you're taking on some feelings and emotions that you're not going to be able to control those things. You're just one person. So just know that those to whom you rent, that there's some out there who are very grateful for what you give, because even though I'm not a landlord, my grandparents, and now they pass these homes on to like my uncles and things, but every renter they have that they've ever had has been on Section 8. And because they're a private landlord, they get to also set some other parameters. In North Carolina, there are certain things that private landlords can do that others can't. Like he was a pastor, so you couldn't live in his home if you weren't married. Two unmarried people of the opposite sex couldn't live together. So you kind of get some ways to control those things, but I just want you to not take that so personally.
Thank you, Shannon. Troy, let's move on to the next.
All right. So Dan Curry said, in terms of Section 8 program structure, is there a project-based Section 8 program that could link to other housing programs such as healthy homes, weatherization, lead-based paint, and repairs, so that they could build a larger base of landlords willing to accept Section 8 assistance? Dan, if you're still in chat, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Excuse me, I was muted there. Yeah, I just, I see a lot of potential. Anytime you can have access to a housing unit, that's kind of a precious moment. And so we have a lot of housing programs out in the community, some of those that I listed in the comment. So is there still an ability to link, in effect, project-based vouchers to some of these other programs as more of a marketing mechanism, so that you get more landlords engaged, accepting vouchers? That's basically the question. And I've been outside of the program for a while, so I don't even know if project vouchers are even still a component of the program.
I mean, so public housing agencies can still project-based, in most cases up to 30% of their vouchers. So it's definitely something that can happen, and that can be combined with assistance to help rehabilitate the unit. So that's definitely something that can happen. And I think that there's a version of this that could also happen with tenant-based vouchers, where there could be incentives to landlords or money to rehabilitate housing that could be tied to accepting a tenant-based voucher as well. So I think that those are both things that can be done in the current program.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay, Ingrid. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I can't think of any offhand, but I'd be happy to look into it for you. There are definitely municipalities and counties that combine voucher holders with weatherization programs or things that help them pass inspections. They're localized and not the ones that I know of aren't necessarily through the state. They are through local agencies, but there are definitely some innovative ways that people are trying to get more money to the voucher program, or to make the voucher program work. But I also think that speaks somewhat to how complicated it is to layer funding to make housing actually affordable. And wouldn't it be great if you could just afford a house with a voucher?
All right, thanks.
One thing is, I believe in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a program for green retrofits. So a lot of money to do climate weatherization on things, but I believe they're only eligible for project-based Section 8. multifamily properties. So if a property could be brought into the program, then they would also, in addition, have access to these retrofit and weatherization monies through the IRA.
Thank you all. To the next question.
All right. The next question. This is a question from Linda Micah. If you're still in chat, can someone on the panel address single vouchers on demand at 18 to 21 for foster youth emerging to adulthood alone? All fosters are eligible for that in college tuition. Linda, is there anything you would like to add or explain about that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I was a licensed foster parent, and I had never heard of the program that at 18 to 21, if a youth is still in foster care, they can request on demand a single voucher for themselves through their case manager or social worker. And I just wondered if that was well known at all in this audience or never heard about. I learned it from a gal who set up in Maryland, who set up a pilot program of Head Start vouchers. So instead of going through the housing authority and all that stuff, she just got some pilot vouchers and put them through Head Start, where the staff, you know, for example, very well know who's living in their van as a family. So I think more piloting of small programs, and certainly the foster care award of vouchers is not a pilot. That's, I believe, in law, but maybe someone here knows about it better than I. Thank you.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that is something that they've done in recent years, and that where they're able to, they have a pool of money that they're able to meet the full need for foster youth. And I think because it's a small enough group of people who are coming out of foster care each year that they've been able to do that. But I think also it probably is true that not as many people are aware of that as should be. So it's great that you're bringing it up. And yeah, I think it's exciting. It would be great if we could do that for more groups of people.
We have time for a couple of more questions. Troy?
Yes. So I'm not quite sure how this name is. JYOW. I wanted to know how vouchers are distributed per county. Is it done by population or what? I hear that some other counties are giving out vouchers, but in my county, it seems that the vouchers are always on a waiting list. And then you got to get in on a waiting list for the waiting list. If you're still in chat, would you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yes, so I work for Rockingham County DSS, and where we're at, rural community, and I hear from different people that they say, well, go to this county and you'll be able to get a voucher, or go to that county and you'll be able to get a voucher. And then I'm looking at my own county, and I think we had like a 2-day window to get on the waiting list, and then before you know it, it's all filled up. And I'm just trying to figure out, are they distributed by population? How are they distributed to counties? Because ours seems like it's always on the waiting list, and maybe I'm just saying what everybody else has got. I just don't know. I'm ignorant of what's going on in other counties. I just want to know how we stand compared to other counties and stuff, other areas.
Let me just chime in. It also depends on how successful they are at utilizing their current vouchers. Our local agency was awarded a lot more based on their success in utilization.
Any other comments on methods of allocation?
I mean, I just saying is this what you're already noticing, but it's pretty random how vouchers are distributed around the country. Like it's just a long history of in different years, Congress funding a certain number of new vouchers, and then there being different formulas along the way that were used to allocate them. And sometimes it's based on need. Sometimes, like Darius was saying, in recent years, especially, they've been taking into account utilization. But it's just this kind of accumulation over time of these awards. And so it, especially in places where population has grown a lot, they often didn't have, the populations to get big awards when the older vouchers were being awarded. And so a lot of times places like that are way behind other parts of the country in how many vouchers they have.
Yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that something we haven't talked about yet is that, housing authorities, housing agencies also differ in how they allocate vouchers. I mean, almost all of them, in most cases, right, there's a scarcity. In some places, there's more of a scarcity than others, but you have a lot of places that have just sort of open waiting lists all the time, and you can sign up anytime. The other places that have waiting lists that are only open for, 1 week or every 7 years. And other places are kind of moving more to lottery systems. And so I think, understanding, trying to figure out kind of what the most efficient and fairest way to allocate those vouchers is important. There's also a lot of places have local preferences for people with particular needs, and whether it's people exiting homelessness or people who've experienced domestic violence, and so that can also change priorities. But I think the key is also making sure, I think one of the concerns I have about some of these, narrow windows, is just making sure that people understand how to apply for vouchers and making it as easy as possible. This is sort of part of making the program easier to use for people.
I would add that there's, it's like a voucher is not a voucher. There's like 7 different flavors. Here we have your standard HCV, housing choice vouchers, that are awarded based on the waiting list. And to your point, the last time it was open was 2 weeks and it's a lottery system. Then, of course, there's the VASH vouchers for the veterans, and they get them within months. Then you have, there's 253 emergency vouchers that were distributed to homeless folks during the pandemic. Then we have something called a family reunification voucher for bringing families together, something like that. Then there's vouchers for foster kids that aged out. And every month I discover some new program. So there's lots of different allocation methods, if you will, other than just the waiting list. At least in my housing authorities out here.
I want to say, though, that for the commenter who is looking for vouchers, I think the shortest answer, though, is that I don't think you're missing any that are out there. There are not a lot out there to be found that are not already spoken for. I think the most recent number is that 1 in 5 Americans that need vouchers get them. And so there's not a stash in some, I'm guessing there's not a stash in some other county that are being unused. And I have heard, I live in Colorado and I go to local housing events, and I have heard similar things from DSSs locally or places that are looking for vouchers, that it seems very random and really like they are searching for vouchers and other places have them and they can't find them. So I think you're not alone. But I also think that when you hear from other folks that there are vouchers out there, I don't know that you're missing them. It's all I'm trying to reassure you of.
We have enough questions and comments to go another half hour, but we don't, we're about to run out of time. Thanks again to our excellent panel, and thanks to our audience for showing your support and interest in the important questions of housing policy and practice that we cover here at the Center Housing Hangouts. I do think we set a recent attendance record for housing hangouts. I attribute this to some extent to the interest of the topic intrinsically, but even more so to the star power of our great panel. Just a quick note about our next event. Hang on a sec. Yeah. If all goes according to plan, where our next housing hangout will occur on November 10th, also a Friday at noon. The topic, housing is a human right. And this time we're tackling that topic not as a frequently heard slogan of housing advocates or something that we often see on t-shirts, but in a from the point of view of international law that we look to answer the question, is housing a human right? And if so, what is the scope for it and how do we enforce it? We'll be inviting panel members from both the housing and legal communities, which we often do anyway. And I hope that that topic will be of interest not only to international lawyers, but to our general audience of housing advocates, experts, and members of the community. So watch for the invitation to that in the next weeks. The recording of this event will be posted on our website within a day or two. Again, thanks to all, and for now, have a great weekend.
Thanks.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.